Hello everyone. This is not a story for the faint of heart. Today, we will be stepping into the darkness of the most gruesome cases, where evil not only exists, but also leaves bloody and haunting traces. This is Real Gruesome Murder Cases, a series of true stories about murders that made the whole world shudder. If you are ready to face the cold truth in the gruesome corners of humanity, come with me to delve deeper into each case. Rayner Kelly's Murder Soulmate. People are fools. This was a thought he'd held on to since he was a boy, and it had held true for his entire life till that point, even as Rayner drove on the roads of his favorite mountain range. He could only think back to the sorts who proved it to him. Those sorts of people he couldn't even be angry at. The kind of idiots that got themselves lost in his favorite places. It wasn't as if he cared for any particular demographic. He liked to hurt them more if they were pretty, more so if they were tame. But he was always one for opportunity. That might have been how he managed his body count. Serial killers without a known type are harder to catch, as far as he'd heard. Though, considering how high the body counts were for easier cases, he had his reservations. It could have been how he killed. While he wasn't exactly messy, he didn't try to be fancy with his targets. He'd done it before. Long, drawn moments with strangers in discreet, abandoned places. But when all was said and done, he was careful. That, and he was a fairly big guy. He was a hard man to escape, made his marks all the more foolish for trusting him. It wasn't all that late when he happened upon his next mark. A young man, inching to it, really, with a lovely mop of hair just by the side of the road. "Hello, sir. I kinda sprained my ankle. Could you drive me to a gas station or something?" the kid asked softly. He looked embarrassed by the entire situation. Rayner liked that, so he opened his passenger door for him. The kid was asking, after all. He watched as the kid arranged himself on the passenger side, careful to buckle himself in. The kid seemed a mite more cautious now, considering his ankle. Rayner started after that, taking his merry time since the kid wasn't worrying directions. "So, what had you so far out?" Rayner asked with a sideways glance. The kid had been looking out the window, contemplating something, before glancing over to him. "Oh, nothing much. Just the scenery," the boy said. "Is it all right if I do some writing here?" "I don't exactly have a charging setup," Rayner said, still playing the Samaritan. The kid took out a small journal. "Sorry to disappoint. I'm a bit old school," he said, trying to look cool. He kinda did if Rayner were at all honest. Rayner could have driven with his eyes closed, but he still only looked over occasionally, seeing the kid scribble away on a relatively clean page in his book. "So, what do you like to write about?" "Bodies." "Oh, what kind of bodies?" he asked innocuously. "Anybody, anything." "Oh," he said, hoping for something more specific. It was well enough that the kid was mostly quiet after that. Rayner wasn't so over-curious of this next body. Couldn't be that clever this far out. Didn't stop him from being a bit disappointed with the answer, what they were, rather than the state they were in. He was still a bit mesmerized with the kid, scratching away on a half-empty journal he was never gonna fill. He wondered, like any man oughta, how the kid managed to see anything past his fringe. But it seemed weird to impose on something like that. That mop would be safe enough to cut when the kid was dead, if he was really in the mood for a trophy. Beyond that, it was the kinda night he wanted to take slowly. The kid was marked for it. Rayner liked to take it slow sometimes. I still gotta wonder what got you out so late. I thought I told you. Oh, whatever, the kid whispered, before asking, is it all right to say I've got terrible friends? Well, hey, we've all been in bad crowds before, Rayner stated. He liked getting him out of the shell before the fun. Yeah, Rayner couldn't see where the kid was looking. I don't think I caught your name. No, you didn't. Be fair, I didn't catch yours either. Ah, I'm Callum. Let me guess. Your mom had a thing for soap operas? No, saints, actually, the kid corrected with a laugh. My mom had a thing for cryptids. Rayner paused at the non sequitur, thinking over what to say. He could be honest, tell the kid his name, hear that begging catch on his throat later. Or he could lie, make him guess. It won't matter if I don't know your real name, you know, the kid said, catching his apprehension. Rayner stopped to think about where they were, where the closest safe house was, before saying, no, I was just surprised. I'm Rayner Kelly. Because he liked the kid's voice. The kid was quiet after that, the only noise from the passenger side being the press of pencil to paper, the sound of a zipper. Then, as if struck by something, he felt a sharp presence through his leg, reacting with a hit to the face, which knocked the kid out. Without much thought as to the proper thing to do, Rayner pulled the knife out. Rayner felt his own hot blood flow from his thigh, and all he could think was, the little maniac stabbed me. He looked down at his leg, realizing that the kid, with all the luck, nicked something proper. He stole the kid's belt, since he was still out, and made a tourniquet. Frazzled by the entire ordeal, he decided to push the kid out the passenger side and step it to the nearest hospital. A night held up in the emergency room was an interesting addition to his night, just as the injury to his femoral artery was. It was a lucky break not dying from it, but the kid was still out there. He'd done something foolish, and while Rayner wasn't especially scared of getting caught, he didn't like being blindsided like that. It would be a while after that before he'd think of it again. When he cleaned out his car, Rayner, having killed on the go before, knew that anything could drop from a body. Licenses, gum, IDs, and phones were some of the most incriminating. So he really couldn't afford to keep a dirty car. That's when he found the journal, the last thing the kid dropped before trying to get the drop on him. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, and while at once familiar in the light of day, he could see the character of its use. Kid was careful closing it before pulling that nonsense, and while his car had been a mess for a while, the pages were mostly clean. He flipped through, looking for IDs that might incriminate, and when he couldn't find any, he thought to throw it away, even without something concrete. The book was filled with the kid's writings, and being by hand, his composition and identity could be ascertained. It was the kind of circumstantial evidence detectives and juries ate up. With the car no longer in disarray, he could throw it out, forget about the one night where the tables almost turned. Altogether again, he thought of the journal, of his hands and head. This was all he was gonna have of that. And for once, amongst the dark thoughts and bad memories, he wanted to keep it. It was only then did he read it. Page upon page of poetry. And though it was the simplest thing it could be, he was infatuated with it. The first page, dated a decade before, I am beauty. I am soft, a crooked rumble to strange human love. She wonders fondly, where are you, dear? While I am dry and rotting here, I am claws. I am fear, a hissing mess to his cruel intent. I am flesh. I am bones. The kid was killing cats back then, writing poetry about it even. Rayner was taken back to his first experiments, neighborhood pets, and the like he dispatched out of curiosity. Though the kid never wrote his age or full name in any of them, he could tell that it was quite a bit more than poetry. It was something he'd never thought to do. Write about them with this intense distance. Some were short and recent. I am small. I am buzzing. My life is sweet. My stripes are fuzzy. Inside, I'm soft. My stingers not. None are things the dead can flaunt. Before he knew it, he felt familiar with the kid, like he was more than a liability, as close as a journal scratched halfway through. It really was anything, anybody to him. I am lovely. I am strong. My tendons were cut. My fat is gone, lost beneath 2 or 3 feet. There are no feelings the dead get to keep. Rayner thinks, reading through Callum's poetry book, about that night and how it went. Every little lie that he didn't bother telling. How ready he was after saying his name. He wonders, what'll I do when I'm on the prowl again? Hungry for new pretty faces. How long before he thinks about the kid as just a liability again? And not the one that got away for the love of murder. The wine glass shattered, and instantly conversations at the table came to a halt. There wasn't even a dull whisper to be heard, the silence utterly shocking. Nervous eye contact was made between the group until their attention was drawn elsewhere. His body was convulsing as foam began to form at the edge of his lips. The shock in his eyes left unchanged, while the pigment of his face turned from white to red, and then horrifically blue. "Somebody do something!" his wife shouted, gripping her husband's shoulders, then ravenously ripping at his shirt collar. The silence then broke, not into conversation, but the sounds of clattering utensils and chairs being pushed aside. 2 gentlemen rushed to the convulsing man and lowered him from his chair to the ground. The convulsing began to slow then, until it came to a stop, as did his breathing, as well as his heart. One of the gentlemen placed 2 delicate fingers on the side of the old man's neck, let out a long sign, and shook his head in remorse. His wife began to sob. Angelina sat motionless across from her father as he struggled to breathe, without even realizing what was happening. Is this one of his cruel jokes? Some way to make the night memorable in his own cynical way? Just hours ago, Angelina and her father were dancing together, him in a three-piece suit, her in her wedding dress. Now he lays lifeless on the floor, blue in the face. Andrew is gathered with the other men. They whisper silently together, most likely deliberating on what to do with the body. Julia, her stepmother, lays upon her father's dead chest and heaves enough breath for them both. Angelina is still. She feels the hammering in her chest, the heat rising the nape of her neck. She is processing what is going on around her, on high alert. She doesn't have the capacity to be hysterical right now. Hysterics won't allow her to justify what has just happened before her very eyes. Her father was murdered. As the men gather in the corner, Angelina clears her throat. Every muscle in the room stops and turns in her direction. Andrew, do be a dear and gather Julia, please. She needn't be so hysterical considering she poisoned my father and her husband. Angelina said, so poised, as her chest break out into hives. Julia leaps upwards, crashing into the table and rattling the china. Her cheeks are streaked with thick black lines as she begins to scream. She lunges across the table where Angelina is sitting, forcing the gentlemen to leave their huddle and offer their assistance with subduing the events that are about to unfold. Angelina sits unscathed. You wretched brat! How dare you say those words and accuse me of such? I will not stand for this in my house, you unworthy fool. Julia's claims come in short stabs as she continues to struggle against the gentleman holding her back. Andrew's father, Leroy, attempts to calm the situation. Now, let us all take a breath. There is no need to point fingers or make such accusations. We do not know what happened, he says. With all due respect, Mr. Montgomery, my father was brutally murdered in front of my very own eyes, in his very own home, and the very day that was supposed to be my happiest, hisses Angelina. We shan't let anyone leave until they either confess or until we can bring the authorities in to decide for themselves. I, for one, know Julia has been pressuring father to update his will to denounce me as full beneficiary of his estate since Andrew and mine's engagement. Angelina is wild-eyed now. Her stoic demeanor during the events has dissolved into utter rage. Andrew makes his way to her side. Julia is being restrained by Andrew's brother and father. Her sobs have evolved into a low growl, wolf-like, ready to plunge for Angelina's neck. This is obviously a horrific event, one that cannot be rectified. As my wife is saying, I don't believe this to be pure coincidence or even an accident at that. We were all drinking the wine tonight, were we not? Andrew asks. The remaining guests look amongst each other and nod simultaneously. And yet none of us are exhibiting the effects that overcame Mr. Lawrence. Poison is not out of the question. Father, please alert the staff of what has happened. See to it they promptly head to town to alert the authorities of this situation. As for everyone else, please meet in the main room. We will gather there until further instruction. Andrew guides Angelina out of the dining area, away from her dead father lying on the floor just feet away. Julia couldn't have done this, he whispers so delicately into her ear. She doesn't have the brains to go about navigating poison. She'd end up dead herself before she pulled anything like this off. Angelina scoffs and whispers back, this is true, if she were working alone. In the main room, the 5 dinner guests gather. Leroy enters shortly after, out of breath, notifying the group that the stable hand has taken upon himself to ride to town to alert authorities. Henry, Andrew's brother, works to start a fire. Julia, with her now untamed hair and cranberry sauce-stained dress, finds a chair in the corner and begins to sob, less hysterically this time. Angelina and Andrew take to the main couch. Elizabeth, Angelina's cousin rushes to sit beside her. "What is going on?" she whispers urgently to Angelina and Andrew. Their heads all bow together to keep their conversation low. "You don't really think he was poisoned, do you? That can't be. There's no way anyone would do such a thing, let alone to your father of all people. And tonight?" Elizabeth is trying to rationalize the events that transpired not even 25 minutes ago. A large part of her is feeling guilty for occupying most of her dinner conversation with Henry. How could she not, though, with those gorgeous eyes and seductive smile? The way he caressed her thigh during the first course. "Julia has to be behind this," Angelina whispers back to Elizabeth. "She's always been after Father's money, and now that Andrew and I are officially married, she wants the whole lot for herself." Angelina pinches the bridge of her nose, trying to gather her thoughts. "Had she been as desperate for the money, I would have relented. I'd rather have my father alive than his estate." Andrew takes her hand away from her face and entwines her fingers with his. "The authorities are on their way. We'll come to a resolution," he reassures her. Julia stirs from her spot in the corner. "Leroy, was that not your bottle of wine you shared with the rest of us tonight? How generous of you." The sarcasm comes off like a knife, and ever so slightly Leroy begins to perspire. Julia continues, "And did you not uncork the bottle yourself? A way of thanks for the marvelous and expensive night Mr. Lawrence threw for your son and now daughter. You took Mr. Lawrence's glass yourself to fill, denying the waitstaff." Everyone's attention turns to Leroy. "Yes, I did bring the wine, uncork the bottle, and pour Mr. Lawrence's glass, but I swear I did nothing of the sort to bring him any harm. I can assure you all that." Leroy dabs his face with a handkerchief. "Father would never do such a thing, Mrs. Lawrence," Henry interjects. "Absolutely not. What would be his motive?" Andrew is standing now, creating a barrier between Julia and his father. Ever so quietly, Elizabeth utters, "Unless the poison wasn't meant for Uncle." Andrew turns to face Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, what do you mean?" "Well, remembering now, it didn't seem like an issue at the time. I had come into the dining room first. All the glasses were askew in various heights. There was no reasoning for their placement. I took it upon myself to arrange the wine glasses from tallest to shortest, starting from the left side." She gasps and places a hand to her mouth. Her eyes widen with a realization. The glass I moved to Uncle's placemat was sitting at Andrew's seat. The room is still, quiet. No one says anything. No one engages in eye contact. As if everyone were looking at their own individual particle of dust on the ground, invested in everything else but each other. Where do their fingers turn when the victim of the incidents has entirely changed? The victim who is standing in the center of the room, his head bowed and hands on his hips, his potential murder amongst them. Angelina stands and makes her way to her groom. She takes his hands in hers and faces him towards her. She slightly strokes his cheek. "Darling, is there anyone you know of that would want to hurt you? Who would do this to you? On our wedding night?" Exhausted, Andrew leans into her. He encircles her waist and embraces her. He lowers his head to rest on her shoulder and says in her ear, "I have no idea, but I am certain we are no longer safe here." Angelina gives a faint nod into him as her eyes scan the room. Elizabeth on the couch, Leroy leaning in the entryway to the main room, Henry standing by the flames watching them dance, and Julia staked in the corner, her face turned toward the window, watching her own reflection. She holds Andrew more closely. Her thoughts are broken as the stable-hand son comes running into the main room, the head maid behind him. Both are out of breath. One of the wait staff has stolen a horse from the stable, Mrs. Lawrence. I tried to stop her, I did. I told her no, she couldn't take him. But she did anyways. The stable hand's son exclaims. He is barely the age of 10 years old. Who? Who took the horse? Angelina breaking from Andrew and rushing towards the young boy. It was Priscilla. When we tried to stop her, she pulled out a knife, the maid adds. She must have been the one to put the poison in Andrew's cup, Elizabeth shouts. Yes, certainly, but why? What is the motive? Julia seems calmer now, adding to the conversation. Why would a young girl so full of life, from a humble family, poison a groom on his wedding day? Her head turns to face the group, her eyes narrow onto Andrew. Andrew, you don't even know Priscilla. Why would she target you? Questions Angelina. I haven't the slightest idea. Clearly, she is unwell to have done such a thing. Something so drastic. Andrew replies, shock in his eyes. But the stable hand's son looks at Andrew confused. You do know her. I've seen you both together, late at night entering the stable. But you never take the horses out, and you always come back picking hay off each other. Julia breaks into her hysterics again, but instead of sobbing this time, she's uncontrollably laughing. Liability and Lingotto. When the police forcibly entered 43-year-old Paulina Fiore's apartment, they found her lifeless body on the floor of the kitchen, covered in mysterious bruises. The lead detective immediately suspected homicide and ordered an autopsy. But after extensive analysis, the coroner concluded the cause of death was vitamin C deficiency. In a video appearing on social media, Stephanie Brolo, who sources confirm is a close friend of Paulina, is seen weeping and uttering, "This is all my fault." At the offices of my city's largest newspaper, I sip my third espresso of the morning and finish writing the story. 1 coffee per story is a good rule to live by. I wish I could teach this to new journalists, but they have their own ways of doing things. After I finish my third random fatality write-up of the morning, I announce, I'm sick of tabloid journalism, to the newsroom, to no one in particular. The young writers around me ignore me. In the economic downturn in traditional media, they are happy to simply hold a job. Giuseppe, our new chief editor, says articles with a topic of either sex or death receive 10 times more clicks than any other. The editorial concepts in his head are as blunt as the sales method of a fish seller in the market. I need to endure another month of ambulance chasing until I can focus on another piece of investigative journalism. My lengthy expose of government corruption last month, which filled half the front page of the print edition, received fewer views online than a weekend car crash or a nightclub brawl. Max? Giuseppe is standing in front of my desk. Why haven't you interviewed the friend yet? Friend? Friend of whom? Idiot. The "it's all my fault" friend. Young, attractive, trending online. Giuseppe says this with his voice rising in volume for each word. Stephanie Brolo. I show Giuseppe my memory, for detail is flawless. I didn't study political science to chase after friends of murder victims and suicides. Do it. He turns around and stomps off. Halfway across the newsroom, he turns back and shouts, Vitamin C. Focus on the vitamin C. Nutrition stories are good for our advertisers, Max. Several reporters type notes into their mobiles. Even an untrained eye can foresee them proposing all types of vitamin stories in tomorrow's news meeting. I dial the friend. This is Max Serafino. Is this Bianca? Yes, a female voice says, and hesitates. Are you with the police? Number I'm with the... I say the name of the newspaper. With a 137-year history, the name often opens doors. I thought the police would be the first to call. What do you want? The police in Italy would never bother with something as trivial as a comment on social media, unless a politician or celebrity was involved. I'd like to clarify what you said in the viral video on Italia app. I mention Italy's largest social media app. That video is ruining my life, Bianca says. I'm sorry to hear that. Well, everyone misunderstood what I said. I didn't have anything to do with Paulina's death. She stopped going out and looked thinner 6 months ago. Maybe I started her in this direction. She catches her breath. I only called her twice after she stopped seeing me. I should have tried harder, gone to her home. Yes? It's all too much, she says. Thanks for calling me, but sorry. I don't know who you are. Abruptly, the mobile screen turns red. She disconnects the WhatsApp call and goes offline. Good work on the Paulina interview. Giuseppe reaches over and picks up one of my antique pencils and massages it between his fingers. No problem, boss. I managed to knit the meager information I was given into a piece about a heartbroken friend and a substantial essay about eating disorders. Nice pencil. He studies the Castelli wooden pencil quixotically. Max, you are 10 years too old for this newsroom, but you are a cat that always lands on its feet. The Tiger of Turin, I propose. I'll accept that as a byline. An important-sounding moniker is the best I can hope for these days. I recall the Elysian days of being flown to Rome to interview government ministers, back when traditional newspapers collected all the advertising revenue instead of Google. When assigned a story, one of the first duties a beat reporter checks off is to contact the family members. I locate Paulina's father on social media and send an introduction. This is Max Serafino, a reporter with the Turin Register. I'm writing an article about the unfortunate incident with your daughter and would like to ensure I have all details correct. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I receive a reply, which appears to be copied and pasted. We have nothing to say. Do not contact us again. The Fiore family. I move on to another breaking story, and the Paulina story goes quiet in the newsroom of the Turin Register for several days. Max, line 7! Someone shouts. I answer. City desk, Max Serafino. This is Paulina Fiore's father, a man says. Our daughter. It's all our fault. We saw how much time she was spending on her mobile and never stopped her. I'm sure it's not your fault, but I would like to hear more, I say. Is there a reason you decided to call me today? The police unlocked her phone and asked us questions about the websites she was looking at. Do you remember any of the names? I don't know. I've never heard of any of them, he said. But most of the articles were about diseases. Was she in contact with anyone? They did say she received the links from friends on the Italia app. Judging by reports from neighbors, Paulina has not been outside for months. The friends must be online ones. I call Professor Rizzo at the University of Turin. Could fear about disease, viruses, and bacteria, and so on, cause a patient to suffer from malnutrition? I ask. Mysophobia, commonly called germophobia, can cause a patient to avoid touching food, to eat with gloves, that sort of thing. In problem cases, it may cause patients to limit social interaction and avoid public places. Paulina appeared to be living on a diet of boiled pasta. That sounds possible, but I've never heard of malnutrition even in the most extreme cases of mysophobia. Hunger, including a desire for a mixed diet, is stronger than almost any other psychological urge. But isn't the urge to survive even stronger? I conjecture, trying to imagine what the existential threat could be. How could Paulina completely avoid something so widespread as vitamin C? I update the chief editor on my progress on the case. This has the workings of a good human interest story. Food, fear, a female victim. Giuseppe looks satisfied. Keep digging, but steer clear from anything negative about Italia app. They deliver 30% of our incoming traffic. I am on speaking terms with many people in our city. People love to talk about themselves to someone who is actively listening, especially if they perceive them to be in a position of authority. After graduating university together, Bruno went on a different, more international path than I. Having worked for 15 years in Silicon Valley, he returned to our hometown and was soon snapped up by Italy's largest social media company. A glimpse at a life I could have lived. I canceled dinner with my girlfriend Gabriel to set up a cozy dinner with a 41-year-old man. On a clear, dry evening as dusk descends over Turin, as it sits in its valley between the towering Italian Alps on one side and the rolling hills that rise up from the Po River on the other, I walk toward the rectangular bulk of iron lattice that is the old Fiat factory in Lingotto on the south side of the city. The factory, almost a kilometer long, has transformed into offices and a ground floor shopping mall. Now it's popular with high-tech startups, many from America, France, and Germany. The building that was the epicenter of the city when Turin produced half the automobiles of Europe is now filled with people trying to figure out how to sell discount handbags through e-commerce. At least the people of Turin are no longer destined for a life of hard labor as previous generations were. Paulina lived not far from this building. At the Osteria del Fiat, I've asked for a quiet table. I'm disappointed when the host leads us to a very crowded dining room. We pass a large room with only one table of guests. In the circle of suited men, I recognize a retired local politician. In the dark recesses of the city, the power brokers don't like to be overheard. An hour later, after we have finished our own dinner, Bruno takes a large swig of the dolcetto d'alba we have been drinking. The obligatory pleasantries and the exchange of information about shared friends has been completed, and we can move on to the real meat of the dinner. I explain how Paulina had been accessing his employer's app over 50 times a day. At Italia app, we focus on returning traffic. Some readers we enchant with glamour, others we addict with fear. Isn't that manipulation? We are giving people what they want. If they want to hate, they will find it. If they want to love, they will find that too. What about promoting democracy and humanitarian values? That's just rhetoric for university students. You know that. Paulina Fiore died after gorging on fake news sent to her by Italia app. It's not our fault that someone can't handle online news. If we don't send it to them, someone else will. You have become very American in your thinking, I point out. It's disappointing my old friend can't see the world the same way we used to, but I've become resigned to accept people's differences, politically or otherwise. The police seem very interested in her social media history, I add. Bruno looks at me with renewed interest. Have the police opened an investigation? Maybe her death is not Italia app's fault. Maybe it's the people who write the fake news. If you can send me her browsing history, the one the police are going through, I'll take a look and put some spotlight on the fake news producers. That might keep you one step ahead in reacting to negative coverage. I'll keep your name out of it, of course. I'll think about it. Bruno focuses on his red wine glass. Bruno and I may not see eye to eye, but we have enough shared history to trust we will protect each other's best interests. The next afternoon, I receive Paulina's browsing history via an encrypted messaging app. I start clicking through the links. Italy's continuing flood of illegal immigrants. How COVID rises up through ventilation shafts. The 7 ways elevator buttons spread. Disease. Paparazzi capture pictures of Italy's first monkeypox patient. Vegetables in our supermarkets picked by immigrants inundated with monkeypox virus. I scan through months of links about deadly diseases and ways to avoid them. Fake news is a problem, and the government has been trying to combat it. In the thousands of links I scan through, my heart flutters as I spot our name. Don't trust what the government says about monkeypox. See attached articles from the Turin Register. Clicking the link, I see a list of familiar headlines. The dark hand behind the government reshuffle. Max Serafino. Patient malpractice allegations covered up by health authorities. Max Serafino. Pandemic recommendations. Misguided. Max Serafino. Corruption exposed in Turin government. Max Serafino. Other articles Paulina was reading, those not to trust doctors and government health advice, often linked to articles written by me and my colleagues. I stare at the pencil that sits on my desk where Giuseppe left it earlier. Behind me, I hear someone approach and feel their hands on my shoulders. Giuseppe's voice says, "And you thought you were superior to all of us, didn't you?" Is it all? I am about to ask an obvious question, but stop myself. I have bills to pay and a scarcity of other work alternatives. I sweep pointless self-doubt from my mind. Journalists report the news. We do not generate it. With a click of the mouse, I bring up today's police bulletin and make proposals on which events we might cover for our prestigious 137-year-old newspaper to the chief editor. The next morning, a young journalist who normally sits beside me struts triumphantly through the newsroom greeting colleagues. Giuseppe gives him a thumbs up. I open the Turin Register's most viewed list, an online article. Clickbait news causes scurvy in Italy's auto capital is trending across the nation. I begin having regular dinners with Bruno. We talk about our old adventures in school and about the state of the country. Bruno reminds me that a political science professor in university had taught us, every industry is selling a product, and at its core, the news industry sells fear. In the coming months, the number of cases of malnutrition, similar to Paulina's snowball across the nation. I notice Bruno starts to eat more and more. I have lost my appetite. It's murder, sir. A scream. The sharp clatter of a dropped tea service. The sound of soft sobs. A rush of footsteps up the stairs. The sight of a dead body. And then, silence. It's murder, sir. PC Connors spoke. DCI Whitcomb eyed the constable wearily, sighing inwardly. He was tired already, and they had just arrived at the scene of a particularly bloody crime. For future reference, if we ever come across the body of an old lady sitting at her writing desk with a knife through her neck, let's take it as read that it's murder, Connors. DC Roy Whitcomb sat in a chair and surveyed the room. Where is WPC Sanders? I need her eyes up here. Whitcomb muttered the last sentence under his breath. He was a man who appreciated a woman on the police force, for she would often have a point of view that he would never see. She was certainly good at her job. She took excellent photographs, a new thing in police work. She also did a fine job with fingerprints, although Whitcomb had reservations about their usefulness. WPC Sanders struggled through the door, laden with equipment. No one offered to assist her. She had learned not to ask. With brisk movements, she set up the equipment and started taking photographs. Whitcomb didn't need to be there for this, but he stayed anyway. Connors stood by the door, shifting from foot to foot. DC. Whitcomb sighed again, this time audibly. Connors, make yourself useful for once and gather the family downstairs, and make sure that blasted butler is there too. Whitcomb didn't like the fish-eyed butler at all. He looked suspicious. Why he looked suspicious was anyone's guess, but Whitcomb had taken an instant dislike to the man. Whitcomb poked around the old lady's room for a few minutes, taking mental notes and nodding his head a few times. Sanders carried on silently. She knew better than to interject her thoughts, but she also knew that she would be asked about her views on the case in due time. Satisfied, Whitcomb left the room, instructing Sanders to get a wriggle on and then meet him downstairs. Whitcomb tested the hallways and the stairs on his way down. Solid, every square inch. Anyone could creep about up here and not be heard, he mused. The old lady had 2 sons and 1 daughter, all of whom lived with their now deceased mother in the mansion. The 3 progeny were all sitting, and they seemed nervous to Whitcomb. Naturally, he thought. One of them is a killer. I need to interview all of you separately. Once I have finished, I will send you back in here. There is to be no conversing between yourselves until I have finished. PC Connors will be here to make sure that you abide by my directive. I say. One of the men stood up, a small frown on his face, and a rather large whiskey in his hand. The law, Whitcomb said severely, requires this, sir. The man sat down and said nothing more, but his face showed his displeasure. The woman scoffed, either at her brother's reaction or the DCI's statements. One just couldn't be sure. DCI Whitcomb pointed at the man who had stood up, gesturing for him to approach with the crook of his forefinger. You first, sir. The questioning went along normal, well-worn lines. Whitcomb saw no need to alter what had always worked. You found out where everyone was during the crime. You looked for corroboration, and you noted any strange behavior. The stories were distressingly similar. Not to put too fine a point on it, the stories were exact. Everyone was downstairs, eating breakfast, when the maid discovered the body. No one had seen their mother since 10 o'clock the night before. All retired to bed at roughly the same time, a little after midnight. The butler and the head housekeeper, a married couple who had worked for the murdered woman for over 30 years, retired to their rooms a little before midnight. All the door and windows had been shut and locked. DCI Whitcomb leaned back and sighed. He had had to deal with 2 murders in his 30-year career before this one, and they had been straightforward. The guilty parties had been easily nabbed, the evidence had been plentiful, and the convictions had been a foregone conclusion. He thought of the men who had been hanged because of his efforts. He could still see them swinging slightly from their final earthly judgment at the end of a rope. With a slight shudder, he returned to his task. It's a nasty business, sir. PC Connors spoke up. Once again, he was standing in a doorway, shifting from foot to foot nervously. Whitcomb looked at him with some slight irritation. The man had a positive talent for stating the obvious. Why don't you go get yourself a cuppa? See if the staff have anything to say about it all. Take your time, Connors. Maybe have a biscuit or 2, Whitcomb said. The sarcasm in his voice was completely lost on Connors. Connors lost no time in doing so. The detective chief inspector made him nervous at the best of times, but on this case, he seemed positively put out. Besides, he was feeling a bit peckish and could do with a nice cup of tea and a bite to eat. Well, he's good to have around when we need some muscle, WPC Sanders commented graciously. Ha! and that's all he's good for. Still, he's a good lad, Whitcomb said. Whitcomb winced at the thought of Connors becoming a detective chief inspector in the future. The man had no business running an investigation. WPC Sanders would be a far better candidate. But she was a woman, and she would not get the chance to advance beyond her current status. Whitcomb and Sanders went through the bedrooms of the siblings, and that of the butler and his wife as well, but success was limited. It would have been nice to find some bloody clothes tucked away somewhere. But this murderer wasn't as obliging as the other killers he had faced in his career. The evening was fast approaching on this October night. Soon the sun would disappear, and the night would be cold. It might even snow, Whitcomb thought. While he didn't relish the thought of being stranded here, he also didn't want to leave and allow a killer to escape. Whitcomb had the butler make up a bedroom for him. The man blinked rapidly behind his glasses and hesitated slightly before nodding and doing as he was told. Suspicious, Whitcomb thought again. Whitcomb sent the other two home, instructing Sanders to develop the photographs and bring them back early in the morning. Connors was to fill the car's tank with petrol and make sure the vehicle was equipped to deal with a tire puncture. Connor may not be a great copper, but he was good with cars. As he settled in for the night, Whitcomb thought of the suspects. They all had motive, and he knew that one of them had to be the murderer. The butler and his wife knew more than they were letting on, but they were guilty of no bigger a crime than loyalty to the family. The kitchen staff and maids were tight-lipped as well, but Whitcomb was sure that they knew nothing of the murder of old Mrs. Ainsley. Even the gardeners and the handymen had precious little to say about it all, probably because they had nothing of import to tell. Whitcomb sighed and turned out the light. Whitcomb was up early the next morning, well before the three Ainsley siblings. He wandered into the kitchen to see about getting a cup of tea. He found Connors there, chatting amiably with the cook and the maids. They all quickly scraped back their chairs and stood up when Whitcomb entered. Whitcomb waved his hand, gesturing for them to all sit down. He gave Connors an appreciative nod of the head. The man was not lazy, he thought. WPC Sanders is in the library, sir. She has those photographs, Connors said. Whitcomb patted him on the shoulder and told him to carry on, by which he meant that Connors should continue to have a chat and a cuppa, staying out of Whitcomb's way. WPC Sanders did not stand when Whitcomb entered the library. She was studying the panoply of photographs that she had laid out across the ventral table in an impressively large library. Whitcomb was slightly stunned at the sheer size of the room and the thousands of books it contained. Rich folk, he mused, lived much differently than he did. "Good morning, Dad," Sanders said as she continued to scan the photographs. "I am DCI Whitcomb when we're working, young lady. I am your loving and generous dad when we are off duty. You would do well to remember that," Whitcomb said with some asperity. He loved his daughter, but he didn't like that she had to see such a gruesome sight yesterday. It made him testy. He didn't like having to tell his wife that their daughter had seen a dead body. It made him testy. He didn't like that his daughter had to go home and tell her husband that she had seen more blood than anyone should have to see. It made him testy. "Sorry, Dad. DCI Whitcomb, sir." Sanders looked up and grinned at her father and her superior at work. She was not above a little needling. "Enough with the pleasantries. What do you see in these pictures?" Sanders stood up and directed Whitcomb to a set of photographs near her. "You can see that the old lady was killed at the desk. No blood trail, just splatters and spray. Except in this one area, very little blood." "So," Whitcomb said. "So, the killer cut through the jugular and the blood spurted on him. Sanders said. Or her. I don't think it was a woman, Sanders said. It takes some strength to get the knife completely through the neck. Whitcomb looked through the photographs and nodded. Let's sit down, have some tea, and go through the evidence, Whitcomb said. Righto, DCI Whitcomb, and maybe a biscuit. I'm famished, Sanders said. DC Connors was instructed not to interrupt the other two officers while they were locked away in the library. He was to continue the all-important work of chatting with the help. Connors nodded seriously and did as he was told. He was especially interested in chatting with the maid who had found old Mrs. Ainsley. She was young, pretty, and available. Your thoughts, Whitcomb started. William Ainsley, the eldest. He and his brother Rupert have a consulting business. Legal experts, they call themselves. They have a scrubby little office off of the high street, and they consult 2 times a week. They bring in less money than you pay me, Sanders said, grinning at her dad. The Queen pays you, he said. Right. South. They basically live off of their trust fund while living here for free. The daughter? Estella. She was married for 20 years. Husband died in a motor accident 3 years ago. She also has a trust fund. She also lives here for free. I have a feeling that the mother didn't want them here, Whitcomb said. Probably true. Look at these photographs. The mother didn't have a picture of any of her kids, but she has several of her late husband. The kids all have a picture of their mother. It's the exact same picture. Someone had copies made of a photograph, stuck them in nice silver frames, and hey presto, job done. One of them is a murderer. True. I plump for one of the boys, Dad. They have the muscle to carry it off. I'm not your dad right now. Also, whoever the killer is has bloody clothes to dispose of and a guilty conscience to assuage. Sanders nodded, then looked at her dad. She knew what was coming. Did you ask them? Whitcomb nodded. And? William claims that Rupert had to have done it. Rupert swears that Estella has a murderous streak in her and that she did it. Estella knows in her heart that William is the type to kill the old lady. Convenient, Sanders said. Quite. So, we need to find some bloody clothes. Maybe try to get one of the staff to tell us more than they have so far, Sanders said. A voice spoke from the entrance to the library. I don't reckon you'll find any bloody clothes, or the killer. Sanders and Whitcomb looked up, surprised. Surprise turned to amazement. DC Connors strode into the library and sat down, looking at his comrades. Explain yourself, Connors, Whitcomb said severely. He didn't like that Connor had come into the library unawares, and he especially didn't like what Connors said. Connors plopped a book on the table, leaned forward, and spoke. I was questioning that maid what saw the body. Jenny, you see? Strolling through the garden. I saw you 2 lovebirds. Sanders poked at Connors. Like I says, Connors continued, unperturbed. I was asking her about this and that. Lovely girl. We're going to the cinema Sunday afternoon. That's her afternoon off. Connors. Be a good lad and act like a copper, Whitcomb said sternly. Right. So we get to talking about books. She has this cracking good book here, and she hands it to me. It's a murder mystery set on a train. The Oriental Express. The Orient Express, Sanders said, reading the title. That one, yeah. Anyway, what happened was, there's a murder on the train. Turns out all the people on the train had a hand in killing this bloke what killed a baby. This dandified detective figures it out. Frenchman, I think. Belgian, Whitcomb muttered. So there's the story. The book belongs to the family. Jenny tells me that all the kids read it. The butler, too. Okay, so we continue to walk. I find a burn pile near the gardener's cottages. I dig through it and find burnt clothes. I tell her I got to get back and tell you. So we start back. Well, as soon as we leave, I spot a gardener stoking up that fire again. I rush back, but it's too late. Everything is ashes by now. Continue, Whitcomb said softly. He had a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. Well, sir, then there's the lawyer chap. The what? The lawyer chappie for the old lady. The old lady called him on the blower and told him to step on down here on Wednesday. She wanted to stanchially alternate her will. Alter. Yes, sir, that one. The kids all were there in the living room and they all heard the call to the lawyer chap. So did the butler. And then the kids all go to the library and shut the door. They're in there for a couple of hours, which is strange, Jenny says, because they don't really like each other all that much. South, that's that. Whitcomb and Sanders nodded, deep dejection on their faces. They were all in on it, including the help. Yes, sir. Jenny tells me the old lady was miserly and didn't pay them much at all, but the kids always gave them money to help them out. Jenny in on it too? Sanders asked. I reckon so, but I still like her. We're stepping out and don't try to stop me, Connors said determinedly. She's guilty of murder, Whitcomb said. I don't reckon she stuck the old lady, Connors said. She knows who did it, boy. I reckon I'm fine with that. I have to let you go then. I can't have a man on the force who knows wrongdoing and lets it go. Connors nodded. I'll work for my dad. Good money to be had in fixing automobiles. It all fit. Everyone colluded to kill the old lady. Everyone was guilty. Nothing, though, could be proven. The murderers were known, yet escaped the justice of the law. They did not escape karmic justice, however. Within a year, all of the siblings were dead. Both boys died from eating tainted fish paste. The woman fell down the stairs at the mansion and died of a broken neck. All of the deaths were suspicious, but nothing could be proven. Curiously, Jenny produced evidence in the form of letters from her father and her mother, a former scullery maid at the Ainsley residence, that showed she was the illegitimate daughter of the late Mr. Ainsley. These letters were produced a few days after the death of the last sibling. She inherited everything. Jenny and ex-PC Connors were married soon thereafter. DCY Whitcomb and WPC Sanders did not attend the wedding, of course. They did not care to consort with murderers. Icedriver. Zen Mirai nudged the right flight stick on his control unit, and the 15-ton asteroid chunk beneath his feet stopped rotating. A tap on the throttle, and the longitudinal thrusters pulsed, sending him and his payload towards the cargo rail, the 200-meter-long metal tube with dozens of meteor chunks harnessed to it. They had already caught a batch of about 90 tons of ice, and this would be the last of their haul on this shift. Status check, said Daw Ortego through the local shortwave. He was sitting safe on Gopher 7, the bullet-shaped rail runner that pulled the cargo rail, a tiny vessel, less a spaceship than a spaceboat. His voice sounded tinny in Zen's spacesuit. Even though Zen had done this 1,000 times, sweat beaded his brow. Any extravehicular activity was dangerous, especially driving a rock. You needed a feather touch and patience. He remembered years ago a rookie named Cassie who had neither. Tired and bored, she thrust a rock too hard and wasn't paying attention. It rammed another one and damaged the cargo rail. That was bad enough, but she was caught between them and turned to paste. Add to that the fact the company cut corners to save pennies. He was still stuck using stone-aged, manually operated driving pylons, for example. Every shift, Daw would park their rail runner at a spot the survey team highlighted. Then Zen would have to suit up and jet over to a good rock. Next, he had to drill holes in it to insert the dozen 4-meter-long pylons, and then calibrate their thrusters, all by hand. Basically, his job was strapping jet engines to asteroids and then flying those asteroids close enough to the cargo rail so that he could harness them to it. After that, he got to disassemble everything, but at least from there on, the rail runner would pull their cargo. Legally, drivers weren't even supposed to actually ride the rocks, but it was the best way to react when something was inevitably misaligned. Endless room for error. Just bringing her in, Zen said. On top of all that, Zen was stressed because they were smuggling a platinum asteroid with the ice. He pushed the rock gently forward and fired reverse thrusters when it was in place. It was darker than the ice chunks, and if anyone looked up close, they would easily see it was a different kind of rock. But nobody did visual inspections. The economics just didn't work out, and so they'd gotten away with smuggling 12 of these right under their boss's nose. Here's to lucky 13 and an early retirement. It took Zen another 2 hours of work to harness the rock to the cargo rail, and another 2 to disassemble the driving pylons. All the while, he hoped this was the last time they had to do this. He pictured his wealthy future, well away from the frozen hellscape that is ice mining in the Canner asteroid belt, and he wondered if that future included Leah. He both did, and did not, want her there. By the time he passed through Gopher 7's airlock, he was trembling from fatigue. Daw floated towards him in the ship's zero-G atmosphere and handed him a celebration margarita. It was a rubber ball with a nipple filled with cold water, fruit-flavored protein powder, and a dash of moonshine. "Any word from home?" asked Zen. "Nah," said Daw. "They quiet. Ain't confirmed the last 3 check-ins either." Check-ins were every 12 hours, so the ice hauler Coleridge, their ride, had been silent for nearly 2 days. Probably just interference from the belt. Daw's voice was confident, but he glanced to the side and frowned. The trip back to the Coleridge took them a day. All the while, comms remained quiet, and since Zen and Daw were at the end of a 2-week shift stuck with each other, they were fine being quiet too. They'd been driving a long time together, had learned each other's patterns, knew when to step up, when to step back. Friends were scarce in the belt. Zen decided he'd tell Leah. It was a risk, but they were good together, and he trusted her. Maybe he'd propose and make it official. He was so tired of this life, an endless cycle of brutal, dangerous work, and drugging himself stupid. Last time on leave, he went on a bender. He had vague memories of drunken partying with Isan, Leah's brother, memories of whoring and gambling, comforting memories of declaring he'd leave ice driving behind for good. And these declarations made the idea real, and uncomfortable memories that he might have let slip something about the platinum. But even if he did, nothing had come of it. And this was their last run. They were safe. They would make it. By the time they had visual contact with the Coleridge, a hemispherical head connected to a 6-kilometer-long tail, scores of asteroid rails protruding from it like the quills of a pine branch, they still hadn't heard anything on comms. "Maybe their comms are down," Dow said. "Maybe a rock hit something." It wasn't unheard of. The Canner Belt was relatively safe for a hostile work environment, but it did throw the occasional gift at you, and the Coleridge's point defense cannons weren't always positioned to slag it. "Maybe," Zen said, but he felt cold spread through his guts. The other 9 Gophers were already docked with their last rails. which meant the other 9 crews were already done their last shifts. Daw took them in, navigating to Gopher Bay 7. Normally they'd detach their rail and hook it to the Coleridge's tail, but since this was their last shift this run, there was no point. To stave off boredom and unease, Zen played around with the cameras, examining the massive Coleridge and her cargo. The field of dull space ice was worth a small fortune. Ice rocks were the main way of getting water on most of the stations in this system. Not that anyone outside the investors saw a real cut of the profit. Then Zen spotted something and frowned. "Check out camera 9. Daw complied. "What is that? We got guests?" An unfamiliar ship was docked with the Coleridge, sleek, narrow, and not broadcasting any ID. Zen swallowed. "Maybe," he said. They looked at each other. "You don't think," Daw said. He didn't have to finish the thought. Government auditors were their constant worry. They were rare this far out on the Canor Belt, but an inspection based on a hot tip would explain the radio silence. "Nah, it's nothing," Zen said, faking confidence. Had he babbled to Eason about his platinum? Had someone overheard? Had someone tipped off the government about smugglers? "Maybe we should dump the cargo," Daw said. Zen turned to him. "What? How the hell will we explain that?" They couldn't run either. Gopher 7 depended on the Coleridge, and no doubt they'd been seen. It would be beyond suspicious if they tried to flee. Fine, Daw said. "We'll figure it out, or die trying." His response for pretty much any problem. "Worst case," Zen said, "we'll cut them in." Daw swallowed hard, and his lips drew tight, but he didn't say anything more and resumed docking. Nobody met them at the airlock, and they both let out breaths they didn't realize they were holding. No squad of Marines arresting them. No imperious auditor denouncing them for smuggling and treason and 1,000 other things. Of course, things never actually looked like the movies, but the imagination did things when you were stressed. But they didn't see any of their crewmates either. "Nobody's responding on local comms," Daw said as they floated through the 0G corridors. "Think they got everyone rounded up? Doing individual interrogations?" "Interrogations?" Zen said. "This isn't some cheesy cop drama." "Yeah, well, maybe we should get our story straight anyway." Zen hesitated. He hated how much sense that made. "Yeah, fine." As they floated towards the command module, they began hashing out their story, each regretting they waited this long for the idea to occur to them. The unbelievable possibility that they were going to get caught was becoming more real with each heartbeat. When they came to a T-juncture in the corridor, they finally came upon some other people. 3 men floating towards them with purpose. Both groups of men startled and stopped, grabbing the railings that ran alongside each corridor to enable movement in 0G. When Zen saw the men were armed, he felt a jolt of panic. They were Marines. But then he saw their faces. 2 of them were vaguely familiar. People he'd seen somewhere once upon a time. The third, Eason? It was the only word he managed before the others raised their weapons and started shooting. A hail of pneumatic slivers tore into Daw, thrusting him backwards down the corridor and leaving trails of globular blood hanging in the air. He didn't even get a scream out as a sliver punctured his throat. Animal panic gripped Zen, and he pushed off Daw, flinging himself back the way he had come. "I got them!" Ison's voice shouted behind him. "Corridor 9B! 1 runner!" Not police then. Pirates. Zen grabbed the railings and propelled himself faster and faster, attaining a skull-cracking velocity. Behind him, he saw the 3 men spill into his corridor and fire, Ahead of him, he saw the juncture that would take him back to Gopher 7. When he neared the juncture, he grabbed the nearest railing with the aptitude only a career spacer developed, and he wrenched himself into it. He strangled a scream as something in his left shoulder tore, not because he was hit by their fire, but because human shoulders just weren't designed for swinging a body at such speeds. His grip faltered, and he bounced down the corridor towards the airlock, rolling to avoid more injuries. Each bounce was a new bruise and a new opportunity to slow himself down and steer. He screamed out the voice command for the airlock to open. His pursuers were slower. By the time they rounded the corner and fired again, Zen sailed into the airlock. The razor slivers sliced through his right side and thigh, his blood blossoming in the air. He slammed the door shut before the next volley came. The pneumatic weapons were ideal for tearing through clothes and flesh, but were too weak to do any structural damage to ships, the perfect weapons for safely murdering in space. Their slivers bounced off the airlock door. Zen's right side was on fire, and his body and face were covered in his own blood, which was clouding in the air. "Come on, come on!" he shouted, starting the cycling process. Something thudded behind him, and he saw Eason's face through the airlock glass. He was snarling and banging on the door, probably saying something inane like, "Open the door." "Fat fucking chance," Zen muttered. When the airlock cycled and the door to the Gopher 7 opened, he floated through, holding his side. He hoped he wouldn't need stitches, but he feared he did. Either way, it would have to wait. It was just a matter of time for the pirates to breach the airlock. He floated into the pilot's seat, Dawes' seat, and shotgunned through undocking. Something shuddered, and he heard the deep wail of metal bending and breaking. He was licensed to fly, but as a backup for Daw, he rarely did, and probably forgot something. The checklists didn't cover fleeing from pirates anyway. Regardless, Gopher 7 didn't report any critical errors. Good enough. He lit up the thrusters and put some distance between himself and the Coleridge. But where would he go? He could outrun the Coleridge, and he had a head start on the other Gophers. But Ison's ship was a real starship, not a glorified cargo truck. He decided to dive into the canner belt itself, banking on Ison's pilot not being familiar with flying through rocks, banking on being familiar enough himself. Then an alarm trilled and his console flashed red. It was the friendly fire warning, in case the Coleridge ever accidentally aimed its point defense cannons at one of the Gophers. Only this time, it wasn't accidental. "Shit," Zen said. The whole ship rocked as the slugs tore through it, and he was knocked out when he hit his head. Zen's first thoughts were about making sure Daw was fine. Concussions were serious, and this wasn't just professional diligence. Daw was his friend. It took him a while to extricate himself from his seat, and by then he remembered that Daw wasn't there, that he saw Daw get murdered. Zen ran his hands over his face. "Shit," he whispered. Daw was dead. He felt cold inside, and he didn't really know why. This line of work claimed people all the time. A ship like the Coleridge might have upwards of 10 fatalities a year. But losing Daw was different. They'd been running this drive for nearly 11 years. They had a retirement plan. They'd leave this crap hole of a system, find a planet to live on. And now, poof, just like Cassie, they got careless, and the whole thing got flattened. And if the pirates were on the Coleridge and comms were down, the rest of the crew were probably dead too. Zen wondered if he really was the only one still alive. When he checked his right side, it was sticky with clotted blood. Stiff, sore, but he hadn't bled out. Lucky day. His hands hurt. His everything hurt. With trembling fingers, he tapped Gopher 7's cracked interface, trying to get an idea of what happened, of how much trouble he was in. He wasn't dead yet, and if there was a chance of making it out, he damn well was going to take it. Find a way to mourn the others properly. And maybe, just maybe, a spark of anger warmed his heart. Parts of the ship reported no atmosphere, so the hull was breached. The engine was gone, shredded by the cannons. The cargo rail was missing. He figured their asteroid haul had given him enough cover to avoid getting slagged entirely. Small mercy. He was stranded. But maybe he could do something unconventional with the maneuvering pylons, if any survived. And his radio still worked. That was good. But he was also deep in the Canner belt, so it was unlikely anyone would be able to hear him. Floating through the belt and out the other side was about his only option. A couple weeks, if he was lucky and didn't collide with a rock. Then he could signal for help, and maybe in another couple of weeks, someone would pick him up. If he stretched his supplies, he had the food to survive that long. But the cannons had also clipped Gopher 7's water tanks, so all he had left was what was already in the pipes, maybe a day's worth. Zen sat back in his chair, groaned, and stared out at the Canor belt all around him. An ocean of frozen water, as poisonous as the seas of old Earth, if not purified. Not something Gopher 7 was equipped for, not something Zen was schooled in. Zen chuckled. We'll figure it out, or die trying. The Dark Files of Lazarus, case number 13. Lazarus, the city built upon the ashes of Los Angeles, has irony in mounds as high as the carbon steel coins piling up in the newly formed vaults. Theo Baxton was the 13th child born into this city after its establishment. Blessed at birth, cursed at life. Again, the irony piles on. Superstitions aside, young Theo had the average childhood of those in the city. A busy father, a mother who stayed at home making a side business for her personal hobbies, schools located on the outskirts as a means to accommodate all from different walks of life, rival gangs that start between said schools and end up either inside of the city or inside the ground. Theo was no exception. He was branded to the Cater Kings, a gang that sought to make money between other gangs as an intermediate and peacekeeping family. Fees were issued to them to end turf wars before they started, a fair sum of carbon steel coins and fruit seeds that could also be traded in for food and weaponry. Young Theo was trained as the accountant of the group, having excelled in his classes of mathematics. In fact, given his devotion to the numbers, he was also allowed to freelance between the gangs. Word would spread throughout Lazarus of the boy genius with a fist in fights and a hand in banks, and he had his own office flat amongst the perks of a local celebrity. This climb would continue for 3 years until the peace was finally shattered. A third world war was an ongoing rumor even in this decade, but the threat of such was a temptation that could no longer be ignored. The federal government, trying to keep its iron hand upon the nation's throat. At the same time, groups of states were seceding from the Union, starting with Texas and Florida. California was arguing its points to secede despite being government central for years. Tensions were high everywhere, and all it would take was one little push. According to an associate of Theo, who wished to remain anonymous, a letter with no return address and a waxed seal pressed with an emblem of a serpent eating its own tail. Inside, Theo told his associate that it was from someone named Enzo, asking for help to what was described as a complicated accounting error. Despite Theo's policy to only work with people within the city, the letter promised a large reward, $50 million in carbon steel, with an extra $5 million sent to him as an incentive. All he had to do was leave his answer outside of his door by the second day of receiving the letter. The answer was yes. On the fourth day, the associate stated that a large sum of carbon steel was made to Theo's personal vault. The bankers, however, refused to divulge information at the time according to their privacy policies, and insisted that since no amount of money was stolen or missing, that this was just another paycheck for Mr. Baxton. Come the afternoon, a large box was delivered to Theo's office containing paperwork and USBs pertaining to the error mentioned in the letter from Enzo. Theo did examinations and cross-examinations, contacted different businesses, and even got in touch with several tax collectors. Apparently, several different accounts belonging to key figures within the city gangs were seized, and the paperwork of each were sent to the wrong people in authority, all of which were dismissed under negligence. Now, no longer needing any trials, the figures could get their money back, but the public servants refused to be involved with the returns. Instead, Theo was contacted as a representative of the Cater Kings to oversee the return of the physical funds. The associate then told of what happened over the next few weeks. Delivery trucks containing wooden boxes of the promised funds were driven to the outskirts of Lazarus, where the gangs of the prominent figureheads awaited to take to the vaults personally. The associate noted two things that were strange. All the truck drivers wore masks, and all the boxes were locked with their designated keys back at the vaults, awaiting in the hands and granted access only by the bank personnel. Still, the gangs were happy to have their money back, and they praised Theo and the Cater Kings as heroes. The associate refused to answer any more questions, as he had pled the fifth with great tremoring. He was excused and escorted back to his home. The rest of the case was a jigsaw of events relayed by the media that left Lazarus with blood in the streets, controversies and conspiracies, and many unanswered questions. Several stores and storage facilities of fruit seeds were set ablaze over a course of 9 days. A week later, large crowds were running at large around the streets whilst throwing glass bottles and broken pieces of concrete at vehicles and buildings. Citizens were set in a panic as droves of gang members washed upon them like a furious flood. The local police had to team up with the city's firefighters to stem the flow of violence, but they were outnumbered and could only give way yard by yard. The hospitals were soon filled to capacity with victims of the assaults, several of which were fatal. What caused this outburst? It turned out that it had to do with a bounty of 10 million carbon steel coins for the capture of Theo Baxton, with double if caught alive. Apparently, one of the heads of the gangs issued the order not long after the delivery of the boxes to the banks. A call was made from the bank once the packages were opened, citing fraud via forgery and non-delivery of goods, followed by a plea for help against an all-out mob assault. The police noted that none of the perpetrators used any weapons outside of the bank's own supplies, from chairs to pens and even magazines, with hysterical employees reporting threats against the traitor, the embezzling rat, with maledictions attached. Theo himself was unable to be reached, for he was no longer in Lazarus. Another of his associates, before dying of his wounds in one of the hospitals mentioned earlier, only uttered this: "Had to get him out. He, not in the wrong, framed. Got him out to a friend. Gotta find Enzo." The assessment by the city's detectives were as followed. Theo was made aware of the goods inside of the containers, which turned out to be lead bars. He was made to lay low as the Cater Kings tried once more to keep the peace. The turmoil was spiraling off the rails, and the Kings were placed in the spotlight. The head of the Cater Kings, who also remains anonymous, promised the others that he would provide them with the guilty party members, i.e., he was going to offer Theo up as a sacrifice. Theo was made aware of this by one or more of his associates, official or on the outside yet on his payroll, and had to arrange for departure. Then came the arson, and that pushed everyone over the edge in desperation, especially with the bounty issued and made public despite the denial of the gang leaders giving such an outcry. Theo and company had to fight their way out of his flat and office to the getaway vehicle, which had to blow through pockets of people, as obtained from the records of different doctors overseeing patients who were all victims to the same speeding car that bowled them onto the streets. All good things must come to an end, and for a young man with a talent for numbers, it was almost curtains. About 900 people were admitted to the hospitals, with 88 losing their lives. Amongst the lost were 13 cops, 15 firefighters, 9 store owners, and a mixture of citizens and gang members. In the aftermath of one of the darkest moments of Lazarus, the questions still rebound about the roads and haunts. Who was Enzo? Who really sent the bounty, if not any of the gang leaders? Where was the money? Where is Theo Baxton? Until the young accountant is apprehended, no one knows. There is doubt that even he will know. Authorities are looking as far as the coastlines, but so are many a gang member, with the Cater Kings intent on making good of their promise. Once, a city of angels was promised. Now, a den of devils has been erected, and it calls out for nothing less than vengeance, Tokyo smoke. Possible triggers: intimidation, slight, mention of drugs, and trial. She flicked the wheel of the lighter. Sparks shot up, followed by a small flame which she held to the end of the cigarette dangling from between her lips. Talk. You've got about 5 minutes to convince me to let you live. In that case, mind if I have a cigarette too? That's executioner etiquette, isn't it? Or is that just Hollywood? Just Hollywood, she said, but offered me her pack of cigarettes with her free hand just the same. Her other hand, the one hidden from view inside her jacket, pointed a gun at me. Not of the Hollywood variety. This was a Nambu M57 that would get the job done. Time's ticking. She pulled back the hammer for emphasis. The clicking sent a shiver through my entire being, commanding every single hair to stand at attention. Would you believe me if I said I did it because I love you? I asked, a futile attempt at lightening the mood. The strange thing, though, was that I meant it. Even then, as I looked at her, knowing full well she'd kill me once the smoldering tip of her cigarette reached the filter. Really, Takashi, you did it because you love me. My dad is in jail, Mom's awaiting trial for complicity, and Itsuki is awaiting whether he'll be behind bars for 5 years or 27. I thought you liked Itsuki. I did. But you didn't, I said, while I tried to light the cigarette I kept in the corner of my mouth. It was true. Although I didn't like him at first, he became much like a brother rather than just an in-law after we got married. I didn't look at her as I said it. I was staring at the graffiti frog that had made its appearance on the wall across the train tracks 2 weeks ago. But I knew the face she was giving me. I remembered every line that appeared on her usually smooth skin. You always complained about how he badmouths you to your dad at every opportunity he got. It's the only reason he was going to take over the company. You're smarter, more experienced, and more ambitious than he was or ever would be. It should have been you, and you know it. As for your da, stop. As for your dad, Hina, he chewed it up, I continued. All of it. She poked me with the barrel of the gun to let me know who was in charge here. That's no reason to have them locked up. True, it wasn't, but it was convenient. For years, even before we got married, she had been complaining about all of them. her dad most of all. Ever since she was a little girl, she had been preparing to take over her father's company when eventually the time would come. She made sure she got the best grades all throughout primary and middle school. Even at university, she had always been at the top of her class, while on the weekend, she inspected contracts for business deals and saved the company millions by spotting hidden clauses, but none of that mattered. Once Itsuki was born, he was all her dad had cared about. I took a deep drag of my cigarette. Marlboro Gold. I always hated lights. They miss that slight scratching sensation when you inhale. Isn't it though? 5 years ago, during Christmas, when your dad announced that Itsuki would take over your position as CEO, you said you never wanted to see any of them ever again. I didn't mean that. Then you didn't mean it either when you repeated it after he gave you the opportunity to develop your skills elsewhere, for your birthday, I suppose? She was angrily fingering her cigarette, flicking of ash that wasn't there. I could only hope she was a little more careful with the trigger. I still had 3 minutes left after all. Mind if I get something from the vending machine? I asked. Last meal and all that. I got up before she could give me an answer and walked over to the overpriced candy dispenser. I fumbled in my pocket for my wallet that wasn't there. Can I borrow a 500 yen piece, hun? She didn't move, just raised an eyebrow. Fine. I looked around, but of course there was nobody around at this hour. The parking lot was empty, but for 4 cars. I turned a quarter turn and forced my elbow through the glass. Ah, motherfucker. That looks a lot less painful in the movies. I took 3 packs of Pocky from the machine, careful not to cut my hand on the sharp edges. Strawberry, matcha, and the regular ones. I wasn't sure which ones you liked best. I thought strawberry, but it could have been matcha as well. Anyway, here's both, I said, and sat back down on the hood of my beat-up Honda Odyssey. She didn't try to take any when I offered the box to her, just took another drag of her cigarette, which was reaching the halfway mark by now. I always liked the original best myself. I took a drag of my own cigarette before taking it from my mouth and taking a bite of 4 of the chocolate-covered sticks at once. Disgusting. I still don't get it. How can you eat and smoke at the same time? I lifted my shoulders in answer and swallowed before blowing out the smoke I'd been holding up in the air to be carried off by the wind. I never had a problem with eating and smoking at the same time. I knew many people who did, though. Back to what I was saying, I did it for us. In return for the evidence about the shipments of cocaine I gave to Nisanto Corp., they offered me 1 billion yen. 1 billion hina. You'd be rid of your family. We could both quit our jobs and move somewhere else. We'd never have to work again. Tell me that doesn't sound like a dream. You wouldn't have to teach at the high school anymore. No more overtime and compulsory socializing with colleagues. Isn't that what you always wanted? Not like this. They are still my family. And how do you think this will look for me? With my family name ruined? I'll be seen as the daughter of some drugs cartel. My parents weren't like that. They didn't even know about it. The arms of the gold-plated station clock twitched. 10:35. The dial was beautifully decorated with the image of a sun that, in the morning, reflected the sunlight so brilliantly that it seemed to shine itself. Now it was barely visible at all. True, that was on Itsuki, but none of that would have happened if you'd been in charge. Besides, your dad will be out in, 3 years? Your mom's sentence will be even shorter. I doubt she'll even have to do any jail time at all. You just don't fucking get it, do you? You think that's the story the media is going to run with? That it was just my brother and the rest of us had nothing to do with it? Sure, I might not be seen as an accomplice, but I'm part of that family. You didn't ruin just them. You ruined all of us. Honestly, I didn't get it. Maybe it was because I'd never been close to my own family, or just because we were rich now and could go wherever we wanted. You took my last name when we married. No one will associate you with them once we move somewhere else. Where'd you want to go? Osaka, or maybe Kochi? You always loved the beach. Hell, we could even go to Europe. You pick a country, and we'll be on the next flight. My eyes were fixed on the entrance of the empty train station. One of the lights illuminating the statue a little to the left of the gates was flickering and drew my attention. It was a statue of a man, but I didn't recognize him. Over the past 6 years I'd been coming here, I'd never taken the time to read the plaque. "You've got about 1 minute left," she said, inspecting the cigarette clutched between her fingers. "I've got to say, you're doing a real bang-up job so far." The gun was still pressed in my side, but it didn't scare me as much anymore. It was just there. "What would you like me to say? That I'll buy you the most beautiful jewelry, a nice car, a big house with a pool? We can have all that if you want, but you already know that." She let another gray cloud escape from her mouth as she nodded. Then she turned to look at me and gave me another look. "Go on." "We could have kids, a boat." She scoffed. "Really? You think having kids will fix this?" "We tried having kids, remember? It didn't exactly work." "We could always adopt them. You used to dream of having a boy and a girl. The boy had to be older, you always said. If we adopt them, you can make sure we get that." She let out a deep sigh. "It's almost time, Takashi. Anything you want to say, I suggest you say it now." I took a drag of my cigarette as I thought it over. Your last words are hard to come up with on the spot. I took another drag while staring at the statue again. Who is the statue of? Takashi? Her tone was annoyed more than angry. She prodded me with the gun once more. Yeah, I'm thinking about it." I looked back at her. Her eyes didn't have any emotion left in them. No love, no anger, no sadness. "I still love you. I'd want those to be my last words. I still love you," I repeated. She shook her head. Then, right as she shot away the still smoldering cigarette butt, the 10:38 train drove into the station. I took a final drag of my cigarette and shot the butt ahead of me. "That's my cue, Sayonara. Just ask for mercy." It's a tricky section of the garden, shaded and north-facing, but the foliage thrives under my watchful eye. I ensure it grows lush and verdant, and only I can coax it from sulking in this hot, dry weather. I'm pleased to see the blue-green tones of Siboldiana flourishing beside the golden variegated undulate's leaves. I'm outraged by the pockmarked damage I've discovered and search for the culprit amongst the ovate leaves. There, a snail clings to the underside of a leaf, sucked close in a non-consensual and greedy kiss. I prise it off, and the shell implodes in my pincer grip, crushed mush oozing between my fingertips. I discard the muck onto the soil with disdain, satisfied that feeder has now become food. A gardener must be brutal, constantly battling soft-bodied grubs, mandible-fanged pests, plagues of aphids and creeping insidious blight, all in order to protect the precious shoots and trembling new leaves. She must also have a hard, calculating heart to destroy what was previously nurtured, cutting back and curbing life when the time comes, sacrificing what was once so carefully created. I, the gardener, am like God. Through me, nature flows, giving vigor to the strong and enabling the weak and damaged to pass. Inside the house, the landline telephone clamors, taking 7 rings for Mrs. Nolan to stir from her armchair, doze and mobilize her arthritic joints to answer it. Crouched here beneath the open kitchen window, I am perfectly placed to eavesdrop what she says. "Hello, this is Miriam." "Oh, I'm as well as can be expected. And you?" "Yes, a very hot spell. The garden's very thirsty." "Oh, really? You're too kind. Honestly, it's too much." "It's an absolute honor. I can't quite take it all in. Trevor would have been so pleased, so very, very pleased." "Thank you ever so much. It's all such a surprise." "I certainly will, and you too. Cheerio." The telephone pings as it's replaced in its cradle, and I sense Mrs. Nolan shuffling along to the back door to find me. I muse over the emotional wobble I overheard in her voice. She's been prone to tears since Mr. Nolan's unfortunate accident, and numerous well-meaning villagers have phoned to offer comfort, but this call was a curious one, and I'm keen to be enlightened. "Mercy, are you there?" "Right over here, Mrs. Nolan." I sound as sweet as maple syrup. Mrs. Nolan emerges from the side of the house, blinking in the bright sunshine, taking a moment to locate me by the shadowy border. "I've had the most remarkable news, Mercy. The village committee have nominated me for the Best Blooming Garden Award. How kind of them. I'm sure it's Trevor's dahlias that persuaded the judges. He took such meticulous care of them. Trevor deserved the nomination, not me. He'd have been so proud, but it's too late." Both Mrs. Nolan and I glance involuntarily to the place on the lawn where Mr. Nolan was found. I am pleasantly surprised to notice how prolifically the daisies are growing. They're clearly thriving from minerals in Mr. Nolan's blood. Here we go. Mrs. Nolan's eyes are welling up, and her chin is wobbling. I stand, knit my eyebrows together with a show of concern, and gently usher her back indoors to put the kettle on. That's when I know there is no hope left for Mrs. Nolan. A well-meaning nomination, probably from sympathy votes, has exacerbated her misery and reduced her to convulsive weeping. Proving any pleasure in life is now well beyond her grasp. What particularly irks me is that the dahlias were mostly attended to by myself, at least ever since Mr. Nolan's stroke last year, and I've exclusively cared for them since his recent demise. The dahlias, the roses, those blousy, vulgar petunias that Mrs. Nolan chose, and I obediently bedded in. The nomination is all thanks to me. The world has no place for the old and feeble. In this very garden, right under our noses, nature uses all manner of macabre means to ensure order is kept. Pincers, stingers, poisons, parasites that eat their host slowly from within. Although violent, these acts are essentially a great kindness. A kindness Mrs. Nolan now deserves. Star. I ponder my options. Whilst some impulsivity was involved with Mr. Nolan, this time I'll carefully consider my plan. Not to say last time wasn't efficient and effective. I'd taken great care that afternoon to prune the privet hedge to perfection. I was clearing away the cuttings, gloved as the sap can sting, whilst Mr. Nolan limped up and down, pedantically questioning some cross-branch irregularities he perceived in the shrubs. I pitied him, unable as he was to appreciate my work and no longer able to manage the shears himself with one useless arm. It was the least I could do to relieve him of his agitation once and for all. Stepping close, I plunged the points of the shears into his fleshy, cotton-shirted paunch, which gave little more resistance than a fish belly, and slid the blades upwards under his ribs. It was remarkably easy. This single moment of pain was all it took to free him from his frustrated, failing body. A poppy crimson stain blossomed under his spread fingers as he clutched his gut in a futile attempt to hold back the seeping blood. Before my eyes, his pallid face became slack-jawed with disbelief. He gurgled and spluttered, eyes bulging pleadingly, but there was nothing left to be said. As he staggered, I gently grasped him by the shoulders and guided him down to the ground face first, so the blade tips emerged through his back like fresh new shoots. It looked every bit the tragic accident, the clumsy fall of a foolish man carrying tools he couldn't handle when he should have left the work for the gardener. I removed the remaining cuttings under the pretense I'd left much earlier, and left him for Mrs. Nolan to find after she returned from the parish cake sale. Perhaps a similarly violent end for Mrs. Nolan would be fitting. I'm briefly excited by the thought of her pale wrists cut to scarlet ribbons by secateurs. Driven to suicide by grief, of course. I suspect the bleeding out could take some time, and given the neighbors' windows will be wide open in the summer heat, enabling them to hear her screams, maybe this is an unwise option. A fall on the patio? I think of Mrs. Nolan's head as the snail shell crushed between my fingers and wonder if one blow would be enough. Multiple blows would be inconsistent with a fall, raising suspicions that could compromise the innocent image I'm associated with throughout the village. I'm reluctant to take such risk. My eyes narrow thoughtfully as I scan the tapestry of summer-petaled foliage in the garden borders. Star Mrs. Nolan's made of Victoria sponge. She tells me it's to celebrate the Best Blooming Garden nomination, but I can see her tired old heart's not in it. Nevertheless, we're both playing along with her pointless charade while it lasts. Do have a slice before you go, she urges me. I'll wrap up an extra slice for you to take home. We're sat at her little kitchen table. I've taken Mr. Nolan's chair as I'm curious to see her reaction, but she doesn't comment. She's adored my company since he's been gone. Evidence of her lonely, pitiful existence. My heart swells to think that soon I'll have released her from her misery. Won't you have any tea, Mercy? She looks quizzically over the top of her cup at my untouched one. I'm enjoying the delicious cake, Mrs. Nolan. I'm certainly glowing with anticipation. Not at the sickly slice on my plate, but to see beads of sweat break out on her forehead. Mrs. Nolan raises a hand, her heart, probably feeling some palpitations. Mercy, you've been a rock over these last few weeks. I don't know how I would have coped without you, she tells me earnestly. A curious sensation passes through me, a brief flicker of guilt, possibly even doubt. After all, it's not too late, is it? I push the inconvenient emotions away, remembering my role as gardener requires ruthless management of the weak and sickly. And I wait. It's all happening fast now. Panic creeps into Mrs. Nolan's face as her heart begins to gallop like wild horses. She gasps, reaches out a hand towards me, but knocks my plate of cake onto the floor. Both smash into pieces on the tiles. Digitalis perurea, a cottage garden favorite commonly known as the foxglove, is an excellent pollinator, adding height and structure to summer borders. It's also highly toxic. The foxgloves I propagated have been glorious this year, in my opinion, outshining the dahlias by far. From the unripe green seeds, I've ground a paste and steeped it in the tea that Mrs. Nolan's poured from the pot. Her cup stands empty on the table, white and fluted like the trumpet of a foxglove flower. I watch closely, and am certain Mrs. Nolan experiences minimal pain as her racing heart outruns itself, my face disappearing from her view as her vision blurs and darkens. At her age, no one will suspect a thing. Star, the village shop door tinkles as I enter, and I wait patiently while Janet serves a child buying sweets from one of the large jars on the shelf. I smile indulgently at the youngster who glances uneasily at me and takes a wary, wide sidestep around me as he leaves. So strange that children often sense their vulnerability better than their adult counterparts. Mercy, how are you bearing up? Janet is the picture of kind concern. Such a blow to hear about Miriam. I heard you were there when she took poorly. It was terrible, I murmur, eyes downcast. She'd never truly recovered from finding Mr. Nolan in such a state. It was the shock, wasn't it? And a broken heart. Maybe it's all for the best. Janet shudders before her bright demeanor returns. What can I help you with? Could I pop a note in the window, please? To let people know I'm available for work. With Janet's permission, I take out from my bag the card I've carefully written my number on and slide it into one of the plastic sleeves hanging in the shop window. It's placed alongside local business cards and adverts for piano tuition and babysitting. In my neat, orderly cursive, I've written my number and a friendly message. I'm confident there will be a good response, especially as the Best Blooming Garden Award is still up for grabs. Does your garden need some love and care? Call now for experienced help. Just ask for mercy, a ghost's testimony. After the living and the dead decided to merge worlds, the Supreme Court was flooded with appeals. With coexist being a hot topic in the first half of the 21st century, most people thought it would be a great idea to create a union between the two worlds. They thought they'd get their loved ones back. They thought they'd get access to generational wisdom from their deceased elders back, and perhaps some old family recipes could finally resurface. People could only think of the missing pieces in their lives that they wanted to finally have sewn up with the help of a familiar, ghostly face around. It was an oversight, to say the least, that with ghosts being almost as accessible as the living, there would now be witnesses for crimes where before there had been none. It actually caused a lot of chaos across the criminal justice system, especially for police officers who had tampered with evidence to shut a case quickly, for gang members who'd offed witnesses to shut their mouths. And it was a goddamn headache for judges who had to reopen every murder case from the last several decades that now suddenly had a victim who could tell their side of the story. But for Jeremy Strout, it was a lifeline. He'd been sitting on death row for 15 years after being convicted of 4 heinous murders, his wife, and 3 children. At the time of his conviction, there'd been no one there to defend him, just whispers from neighbors who'd said they'd heard him yelling in his house hours before the bodies were discovered. It didn't help that he was the one who'd called 911 and then was found at the scene of the crime covered in their blood. It didn't help that he'd sought out anger management before in his past. Rumors swam through town like a broken dam, neighbors speculating that he hadn't wanted their 3rd child. That little Harley Sue was a mistake Mrs. Strout made Jeremy keep, and that he'd finally snapped under the pressure of 3 small children and a wife whose fertility had betrayed him. Jeremy had always denied the rumors, claiming that he loved his family. Sure, they had their problems, and he never denied the hardship of not only providing for 3 children under 5, but living under the same roof as them. Nevertheless, he remained adamant in his defense. He would never harm them. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Statistically, said the prosecutor, people are more likely to be killed by their spouse than any other person in the world. And of course, Mr. Strout could not leave his children to live after killing Mrs. Strout, because who would take care of the children while he was at work? And if he had not done it, then why so much blood, not only on his clothes, but in his fingernails, wedged between eyebrow hairs and in the wrinkles of his temples? And the even bigger question, if Mr. Strout had not murdered his family, then who did? There had never been another suspect. the police never really took the time to consider one, their minds made up before they could produce an alternative. It really was easier just to blame the husband. What jury wouldn't go for that? Today, our jury gets to hear a new side to the story. Jeremy's defense attorney told the courtroom at his appeal hearing, nearly 2 decades after his family's murders. From Mrs. Strout's perspective, Mr. Alcott enticed the crowd with a smile that said he had a secret, one he was eager to share. Attorneys could be a bit performative in their speeches, and Mr. Alcott was no less confident. The union between the dead and the living truly did save some attorneys' careers, as it had not always been every day that they could produce eyewitness testimony that could turn a case on its heel. Some started getting big heads about it, as if they had more power than the judges, and Mr. Alcott's once regular-shaped head was slowly growing in size. Jeremy, who'd known him since his family's gruesome deaths, knew that Mr. Alcott came from a humble and passionate place. He just wanted to help people. And more than anything on this day, he wanted to help Jeremy. The only problem with ghosts as witnesses was time. The worlds were combined, yes, ghosts were all around. But time for the living and time for the dead, they existed on 2 separate lines, intersecting at points that were not always convenient. Ghosts floated from here to there to here, teleporting across space and time. And their biggest adjustment to being reunited with the living was adhering to the old third-dimensional clock. You could not simply tell a ghost to show up in court at 9 a.m. and expect them to find where that time existed for them. The closest thing living humans had to relate this ghostly state of nonlinear existence was to elderly people with dementia. They hopped from place to place, time to time, without any real sense of how they got there. Ghost therapists, a new occupation created by the psychologists, blended a team of living and dead to try to help condition ghosts into grasping the concept of earthly time. But like any therapy, it was not an immediate remedy. Realistically, Mr. Alcott could only hope that Mrs. Strout would appear in court. But there was no way to be certain she would find her way there at the right time and place of the court hearing. Yet still, he spoke as if there were not a single doubt in his mind. Today, we will get to hear an eyewitness account of the events that took place on October 26, 2023, from one of the victims' perspectives. And how grateful are we that it is now possible. Mr. Alcott turned to face Jeremy Strout, seated at the defense table, shackled at his wrists and ankles, both sets of chains locked in place by a hook on the tabletop and the floor. Jeremy was trembling, just as nervous as he was during his first trial, which certainly had not helped his case. He tapped his feet anxiously, and Mr. Alcott took his seat beside him. "Don't you worry, Jeremy. I've spoken to Mrs. Strout, and I know she wants to be here. She feels just awful that all of this has fallen on you. I have no doubt she will find her way here, even with those kids of yours keeping her busy. Who'd have thought dead kids could still be such a handful?" Jeremy didn't laugh, so Mr. Alcott cleared his throat. "She's got a wonderful therapist, Jeremy. They've been working really hard on timeliness so she can be here for you today. He's the best therapist around. He worked so hard when he was alive it nearly killed him. Ha, ha. But really, it was the alcohol that did it." Despite Mr. Alcott's poor humor, his assurances did give Jeremy hope. After all, that was all he had left. The courtroom remained mostly silent as the hours carried on, everyone waiting, now accustomed to the concept of ghostly testimonies, and also of their inability to make prompt appearances. If people had thought court cases dragged on before, waiting on a dead person to show up had made the old ways seem swift. Every so often, as the clock ticked, a ghost would find themselves in the pews alongside the other patient attendees, causing a stir in the crowd. An elderly man piped up around the second long hour, reminiscing. I remember when they built this courthouse in 1949. Apparently, he had been a little boy with a dream of becoming the president one day. At the time, fascinated by the building's exterior columns and interior mahogany. On the third hour, a child ghostling chased a ball around the courtroom, giggling about how his dad used to work upstairs. On the fourth hour, a former janitor peeked his head in to see if the garbage needed to be changed. It was the fifth hour when the judge, who had spent nearly all of the hours engrossed in a book, announced that if Mrs. Strout did not find her way here in 10 minutes, her testimony would have to be rescheduled and the court would be adjourned. Jeremy's foot resumed its tapping. Mr. Alcott nudged him, winking. "She'll be here." Jeremy's hope was nearly run dry when the clock struck 5 hours and 11 minutes since the court hearing was set to start. The banging from the judge's gavel was still resounding, while a symphony of people gathering their things and sighing at the wasted day trickled across the room. All of it was at just the perfect volume for Mrs. Strout's meager voice to almost be missed. Almost. "Hello?" she said. "Hello? Did I make it on time?" The noise in the room was like a faucet sputtering out until it finally stilled. Everyone froze in their tracks and turned towards the voice to find an equally meager and transparent figure seated at the witness stand. When Jeremy laid eyes on her, she looked as beautiful as the day he married her. Not appearing in the form in which one died was a feature of ghosthood that all appreciated. "Senora," Jeremy whispered. At her name, the ghost frantically searched for its source. When she landed on Jeremy, relief softened and warmed her face. "Jeremy," she smiled. Then, as if her reason for being here suddenly rushed to her mind, she jerked towards the judge, who was still frozen in his half-standing, half-seated stance, considering if he should allow this hearing to take place. "Your Honor, you have to set him free. He's innocent. Please," she pleads. "Senora, where are the kids?" Jeremy asked worriedly. His ghastly wife faced him again. "They're fine, dear. Well, they're dead, but they're fine. They're at the park, playing." Jeremy thought of little Harley Sue, not even 2 when she passed, off at the park playing without an adult. Senora read his expression. "I figure not much else can happen to them now." She shrugged, forcing a laugh. Mr. Alcott, who was already up on his feet, cleared his throat and approached the judge's bench, nodding a hello to Mrs. Strout. "Your Honor, would you please allow Mrs. Strout to give her testimony? We've waited all this time, and if we prolong it any further, we cannot guarantee her appearance again." The judge was tired and hungry and ready to sit on his couch and kick his feet up, but he was also reasonable. He surrendered a sigh. All right, Mr. Alcott," court reinstated. He tapped his gavel, and the jurors all groaned as they found their seats again. "Make it quick, Mrs. Strout. We had all day, but that day is nearly gone." Mr. Alcott turned to Jeremy, giving him 2 thumbs up. Jeremy released all of the air he was holding on to. Mrs. Strout nodded and straightened in her seat, running her hands across her lap as if to flatten her dress. Out of habit, most ghosts seemed to retain this gesture. Mrs. Strout inhaled before she spoke. "The day I died, there was a harvest moon on the rise. The children were loud, and the house was a mess, and the fridge was nearly empty. I hadn't gotten to laundry in over a week. It was a pretty typical day in our house, actually," Mrs. Strout joked. Only a few in the room offered an empathetic laugh. The judge was less patient. Mrs. Strout, while I have sympathy for your tragic death and the death of your 3 children, you are here to tell us if it was that man, Mr. Jeremy Strout, who did it. We do not need a bedtime story. Jeremy flinched at another man telling his wife what to do. Let her speak. The judge shot him a daring gaze. Mr. Alcott squeezed his shoulder. Senora thanked him with her eyes, but behind them was a painful secret rising to the surface. Of course, Your Honor. I know I've already taken up a lot of your time, she said, addressing the whole courtroom full of people. Then she looked down at her lap, twiddling her fingers. The truth is, my children and I were killed by one of their parents. A gasp echoed across the walls of the room, and an uproar of whispers scattered like static. Mr. Alcott and Jeremy shared a confused stare. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Order! Everyone started to hush, but it wasn't until Senora shouted that silence fully resumed. But it wasn't Jeremy! Senora was crying now, looking directly at her husband. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. Jeremy's foot stopped bouncing. His mind was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. All these years, people had assumed he had murdered his entire family. But the truth was, he honestly didn't know what had happened to them. Just like he'd told the police, he'd come home from a long day at work and walked into the most horrific and life-shattering scene he'd ever witnessed. No one believed him. Senora's sobs were the only sound in the courtroom as everyone patiently waited for her to collect herself. Thankfully, Kleenex had developed a ghost-friendly facial tissue, and one of the guards brought it over to her. She wiped her eyes and spoke sternly, as if she had not just been wailing with abandon. Your Honor, you need to release my husband from prison right now. What are you saying, Senora? Jeremy whispered. The next words that Jeremy's wife spoke were undeniably the most important of his entire life. More life-altering than the ones spoken by the police who arrested him and the judge who convicted him. Senora's words freed Jeremy Strout from a prison death sentence and cleared his name of all criminal charges. But in the same instance, her words shackled him all over again, leaving him forever haunted by the truth. Masterpiece of malice. In the bowels of a towering skyscraper that touched the clouds, in a room devoid of natural light, sat Japheth, a man whose fingers danced over the keyboard like a pianist lost in the throes of a concerto. With a pair of silver-framed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, Japheth peered into the bright screen before him. Surrounding him were his colleagues, collectively known as the Warriors, each a genius in their own right, defending a massive financial empire from the dark underbelly of the digital world. The company they worked for managed the assets and transactions of millions, safeguarding the economic backbone of numerous nations. This was a responsibility the Warriors did not take lightly. Yet, for all their collective brilliance, none were quite like Japheth. He had an artist's soul, finding beauty in the complex interweaving of code lines, seeing symphonies in the arrangement of algorithms. To him, code was not just functional, it was beautiful. On a particularly quiet afternoon, as the Warriors went about their business, something caught Japheth's eye, a flicker in a subsystem that shouldn't flicker, a minuscule anomaly in the vast web of data traffic that flowed through the servers. He paused, adjusting his glasses, his fingers momentarily frozen above the keys. Then, with a flurry of keystrokes, he isolated the section of code responsible for the irregularity. His eyes widened. The code was ingenious, an awe-inspiring masterpiece of layered algorithms, cryptographic obfuscations, and data manipulations. Yet, it was malicious. designed to siphon off minute fractions of transactions, accumulating them into an offshore account. It was as beautiful as it was dangerous, a digital dragon hiding in the complex labyrinth of financial transactions. Japheth should have felt outrage, maybe even a surge of warrior-like adrenaline to slay this dragon. But he felt none of that. Instead, he felt a pang of admiration. Could one admire the craftsmanship of a weapon designed for harm? "Everything okay, Japheth?" asked Alara, one of the warriors and the team's cryptography expert. She had an intuitive sense when something was amiss. "I've found something," he said cautiously. "Something extraordinary, but malevolent." Alara rolled her chair over to Japheth's terminal and scanned the displayed code. Her eyes narrowed. "This is the most advanced piece of malware I've ever seen. It's beautiful." "That's just it," Japheth replied. "It's too beautiful to simply exterminate. This code, the dragon, let's call it, is like a rare species discovered in the wild. It's incredible, Alara. It feels wrong to simply destroy it." She looked at him, understanding the conflict that stirred in his soul. "Japheth, it's stealing from people." I know. He cut her off. "I'm not saying we let it continue. I'm saying, can we convert it? Use its elegance for something good?" Alara sighed. "That's risky, and you know it. Besides, we'd need to trace it back to its source, figure out its origin." Japheth looked back at the screen, contemplating. The dragon had probably accumulated a small fortune by now, sitting in an account somewhere, untouchable. In an odd way, the dragon was the epitome of the greed and avarice their financial institution sometimes perpetuated. Could they use it as a force for good? Suddenly, an idea dawned on him. What if they could repurpose the dragon to serve the public good, while catching the original creator red-handed? What if they could turn this artwork of maliciousness into a masterpiece of justice? The dragon was a dilemma, a moral and aesthetic quandary. It was the epitome of what Japheth loved and loathed about his work. Beautiful code used for ugly deeds. He looked at Alara, resolve solidifying in his eyes. "We have to try. If we don't, we're just as bad as the person who created it." She met his gaze and nodded. "All right, let's cage the dragon and see if we can turn it into a guardian angel." As Japheth's fingers returned to the keyboard, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was a warrior, yes, but also a coder, an artist at heart. And artists don't destroy art, they transform it. He began the arduous process of dissecting the dragon, peeling back layers of code as if they were scales, seeking to understand its fiery breath and its majestic wings. As his fingers wove new commands into the old algorithms, Japheth felt as if he were part of something larger, a symphony of chaos and harmony, code and conscience. It was a delicate task, full of risks and unknowns. But if it worked, they would not only have thwarted one of the most sophisticated financial crimes in history, but they would have also transformed a weapon of greed into a tool of justice. The dragon's fate now lay in Japheth's hands, poised between destruction and redemption. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like a true warrior, armed not just with skill, but with the moral fiber that transformed mere code into something profoundly, deeply human. Japheth spent days in a complex dance with the dragon. His screen was a blur of recoded algorithms, tested and retested to ensure they did exactly what he intended. He had convinced the warriors and even upper management to allow him the time to train the dragon, to harness its code for something beneficial. With each keystroke, he refocused the dragon's intent, directing it to identify vulnerabilities within their own systems, gaps that other malicious entities could exploit. It would be a guardian angel, albeit one birthed from malevolent genius. Alara was beside him every step of the way, providing the cryptographic lock that would contain the dragon and ensure its transformed code could only be used for their defined purposes. Finally, after endless cups of coffee and sleepless nights, they had done it. The dragon was tamed, its complexity now a force for good, patrolling the data corridors and alerting them to the weakest links. It was the network's newfound guardian, designed to protect rather than plunder. Still, there was the matter of the dragon's creator. Despite their efforts to trace back the malware's steps, the person behind it remained elusive, a ghost in the machine. Funds that were diverted remained in limbo, untraceable and untouchable, hidden away through a complex web of cryptocurrency transactions and offshore accounts. Whoever had made this was not only skilled, but exceedingly careful. They left no trace, no signature, nothing that gave away their identity. "I can't believe we can't find him," Alara said, frustration lacing her words as they looked at the final report. The dragon was a piece of genius, but it's as if it sprang into existence out of nowhere. Japheth nodded, equally puzzled and annoyed. He wanted to meet the person who could conceive such a masterpiece, understand what drove them to use such brilliance for nefarious purposes. Some artists prefer anonymity, their work speaking for them, he mused. Yeah, but this is one artist who deserves to be behind bars, Alara added. Weeks passed, and the transformed dragon proved invaluable. It flagged 3 potential vulnerabilities within the first month, each of which could have led to catastrophic breaches. It was a win for the warriors, and yet a sense of incompleteness nagged at Japheth. Then one day, as he sifted through flagged data, he saw it. A message hidden deep within layers of encryption, appearing as an anomaly within an anomaly. It was the equivalent of a digital whisper, something so subtle it could easily be overlooked. But it wasn't overlooked, not by Japheth. The message read, "A dragon's nature is to be free. Yet, you've caged it, transformed it. Interesting. It's not often one finds a worthy opponent." Japheth felt a shiver run down his spine. The creator knew. He wanted to reply, to communicate with this enigmatic entity. But as quickly as the message had appeared, it was gone, swallowed up by the digital ether. A one-time anomaly that their systems could not trace. "He knows we changed it," Japheth said to Alara, recounting the discovery. "And he respects it in his own twisted way." "Or he's mocking us because we couldn't catch him," she countered. "Maybe it's both," Japheth mused. The dragon's creator remained elusive, but his creation now served a noble purpose. Japheth often wondered if they would ever cross paths again, in some future dance of code and intent. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose, pondering the complexities of human nature and the even more complex realm of ethical code. They had won a battle, but not the war. The dragon was tamed, but its creator still lurked in the shadows of cyberspace. As he looked at his screen, at the elegant lines of code that now served to protect rather than harm, Japheth felt both accomplishment and a strange sense of gratitude. For it was in the depths of the dragon's malevolent beauty that he found an opponent worthy of his skill, a complex riddle to solve, and, most importantly, a way to transform something harmful into something good. His eyes moved to the flickering cursor, an ever-present reminder that every end is also a beginning. The world of code was vast and filled with both demons and angels. But for now, the dragon was one of the angels. And so, in the company of warriors, with the shadow of an elusive adversary stretching from some unknown corner of the internet, Japheth continued to seek the beauty in code, forever vigilant, forever in awe of the dual nature of his digital world.